I'll leave before sunrise. The words left her lips quietly, yet they struck the ancient stone walls harder than any scream ever could. The Vampire King didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there, blocking the door. The throne room of Nightfall Citadel had witnessed wars, betrayals, coronations, and executions. It had echoed with the cries of enemies and the pledges of immortal loyalty. But never, not once in its 1,000-year history, had it witnessed a rejected bride who refused to beg. And that was exactly why every immortal inside the chamber was watching her now. Her name was Elara Voss. A human. A rejected bride. A girl who had nothing left, but still somehow stood with dignity that made immortals uneasy. Snow drifted silently beyond the towering black windows. The storm had begun hours ago, coating the mountain fortress in ice and isolation. It was beautiful in a cruel, indifferent way. Elara stood in the center of the throne room alone. Her wedding dress, once ivory, was now stained with the dust of travel and the exhaustion of hope. The hem was torn slightly from climbing the endless mountain steps. Her cloak, thin and worn, barely protected her from the freezing air that seeped through ancient cracks in the stone. She carried no crown, no jewels, no pride. Only a small leather satchel, the sum of her entire existence. Across from her stood the most feared being in existence. King Kael Draven, the Vampire King, the immortal ruler of the Night Court, the predator that monsters feared. He stood tall and unmoving, his black coat falling perfectly over his broad shoulders. His silver-white hair framed a face carved from cold perfection, and his crimson eyes glowed faintly in the torchlight. Eyes that had seen centuries. Eyes that had buried everyone he'd ever loved. Eyes that now stared at her with something dangerously close to conflict. Around them, dozens of vampire nobles watched in silence. They had expected tears. Begging. Desperation. Humans always begged. Humans always broke. But Elara Voss did none of those things. She simply met his gaze. Steady. Quiet. Unbroken. She reached into her satchel and removed a folded parchment. The binding agreement. The marriage contract. The alliance between her dying human province and the immortal Night Court. Signed. Seal. And now. Rejected. She extended it toward him. Her hand didn't tremble. Kael stared at the document. He remembered signing it months ago, back when it had been a political necessity. Back when her name had been nothing more than ink. He took the parchment carefully, his fingers never touching hers. The absence of contact was louder than rejection itself. He read it again, though he already knew every word. His jaw tightened. I cannot accept this binding, he said quietly. No emotion. No apology. Just truth. A quiet cruelty. The court remained perfectly still. They watched her closely. Waiting for the human girl to shatter. But Elara didn't. She inhaled slowly. Then she nodded once. I understand, she said. Her voice didn't break. She didn't accuse him. Didn't plead. Didn't ask why. She simply accepted it. And that frightened them more than anything else. She stepped forward and took the parchment back from his hand. Her fingers brushed the paper only. Never him. I'll leave before sunrise, she said calmly. The words settled into the room like falling ash. A murmur spread quietly among the nobles. Humans weren't supposed to accept rejection like this. Humans fought. Humans begged. Humans humiliated themselves for survival. But not her. Never her. She turned toward the massive black doors. Toward the storm. Toward the cold that would likely kill her before morning. And still, she walked. Behind her, Kael felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something worse. Regret. Your Majesty, one noble whispered carefully, shall we arrange transport? Kael didn't answer. He was still watching her. Watching the quiet strength in her fragile human form. Watching the way she carried rejection like something she had practiced her entire life. Like this wasn't new. Like she had always been unwanted. Elara reached the doors. She didn't look back. Didn't hesitate. Didn't hope. She simply placed her hand on the ancient iron handle. And paused. Not to reconsider. But to steady herself. The doors opened with a deep, echoing groan. Cold wind exploded into the throne room, carrying snow and winter and reality with it. Death waited outside. She stepped forward. One step closer to disappearing from his world forever. And suddenly, stop. The word escaped him before he could stop it. The entire court froze. Elara paused. Slowly she turned back. Kael was already moving. He descended the throne steps, each footstep echoing with immortal authority. He stopped directly in front of her. close enough now to see the exhaustion in her eyes. The quiet pain she refused to show. The strength she refused to surrender. He didn't touch her. Didn't command her. Didn't imprison her. He simply stood there, blocking the door, blocking her path to death. His voice when he spoke was quiet. Not alone. 2 words. That was all. But those 2 words changed everything. The court gasped softly. Elara stared at him. Confused. Wary. Careful. You rejected me, she said gently. Not accusing. Just stating truth. Yes, he admitted. Silence stretched between them. Snow swirled around their feet. Cold air filled the space between 2 beings from completely different worlds. And yet, he said quietly, I will not let you die because of my choice. Her expression didn't soften. Didn't warm. She had learned long ago not to trust sudden kindness. I did not ask for protection, she replied. Her voice was calm, but firm. Kael felt the words like a blade. He studied her. Really studied her. This human girl who refused to beg. Who refused to break. Who refused to be small. And for the first time in centuries, he didn't feel like a king. He felt like a man who had made a mistake. You are free to leave, he said. And you are free to stay. Her breath caught slightly. Not from hope, but from something far more dangerous. Choice. Real choice. Not obligation. Not command. Choice. The court watched in silence. History itself held its breath. Elara looked past him. At the storm. At freedom. At death. Then back at him. At safety. At uncertainty. At the vampire king who had rejected her. And now refused to abandon her. I will stay, she said quietly. But only until sunrise. Kael nodded once. He stepped aside. The path behind him opened. Not as a prison, but as an invitation. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king realized something terrifying. He didn't want her to leave. The east tower was silent. Elara sat by the tall arched window, the first light of dawn brushing snow across the frozen valley below. Her fingers traced the frost on the glass, each line a map of paths she might take, or paths she might be forced to survive. She had chosen to stay until sunrise, and with that choice, the rules of the night court now fell upon her like shadows waiting to measure her strength. Silence, however, was deceptive in Nightfall Citadel. Every door could hide eyes. Every corridor could hide whispers. And every torch flicker could betray judgment. Her first encounter came at breakfast. Or rather what passed for it. A tray of food appeared outside her door. A simple loaf, a small bowl of broth, and a cup of wine that smelled faintly of spiced berries. No note, no explanation, no servant's face. She didn't flinch. She accepted it, moved it to the table and ate quietly. She didn't look around, didn't beg, didn't try to charm anyone. That in itself was a statement, her refusal to perform for approval. But the vampires of the night court were patient predators. And patience was part of the test. By mid-morning the whispers began. A young noblewoman, draped in silk that gleamed even under dim torchlight, appeared at the door. You are far from your province, human, she said, her tone icy. I imagine you do not yet understand the rules of this court. Elara stood slowly. Then I will learn them, she said simply. No tremor. No fear. Her voice was soft, yet each word carried calm certainty. The noblewoman's eyes narrowed. You think you belong here? I think I belong where I choose to be, Elara replied. The words were not defiance. They were truth. And that was far more dangerous than anger. The noblewoman left without another word, but the message was clear. The court would test her, humiliate her, and attempt to break her composure. Later, in the shadowed halls of the citadel, she found herself faced with the first trial of subtle cruelty. A group of younger vampires, tasked with etiquette and observation, blocked her passage. They smirked, whispered, and deliberately spilled wine onto her cloak. Laughter followed. A mortal would have cried, pleaded, or run. Elara did none of these. She bent to brush the stain with a handkerchief she had brought from home. She did not flinch from the mocking stares. She did not raise her voice. She simply moved forward, eyes focused, calm, unbroken. And then she noticed him. From the shadows above, Kael Draven watched silently. His crimson eyes burned with restrained intensity. He had not intervened. Not yet. But every movement of the human girl, the way she held herself, the way she refused to be diminished, struck something deep within him. Something he had long convinced himself no mortal could ever possess. Courage. The day unfolded like a series of subtle examinations. She was asked to serve tea in the grand hall. She spilled nothing, though nobles leaned close, hoping to provoke error. She carried documents to the treasury with precision. She overheard whispered insults about her appearance, her past, her mortality. She endured every glance, every cruel word with quiet dignity. And yet, it was not her composure that captured attention. It was her kindness. In the courtyard, she encountered the youngest prince of the night court, barely 10, trembling before a group of older children who mocked his awkwardness. Without thinking, Elara stepped between them. "Leave him," she said softly, firmly. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. The older children faltered, and used to a mortal daring to intervene in vampire hierarchies. They backed off with muttered curses. The boy blinked up at her wide-eyed. "Thank you," he whispered. Elara smiled briefly, the faintest curve of lips, and touched his shoulder lightly. It was such a small gesture, so human, yet it carried more warmth than the vast halls could contain. Kael had watched the entire scene from a balcony above. The subtle shift in her character, the bravery, the humility, the compassion, struck him deeper than any blade could. She had defended someone weaker than herself, someone he had no reason to care for. And yet she had. The rest of the court noticed too, though they tried not to admit it. There were whispers, "The mortal girl, she is different." By nightfall, Elara returned to her tower chamber, exhausted but undaunted. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her cloak, but it was not fear, it was fatigue. She poured a small cup of wine, warmed it in the hearth, and allowed herself a quiet moment. Then came the soft knock. "Enter," she said, though she already knew who it would be. Kael stepped into the chamber, silent, imposing, yet somehow less untouchable in this small room. He observed her carefully. Not coldly, but with the slow, deliberate calculation of one who measures centuries of error against moments of truth. "You are surviving better than expected," he said, his voice low, controlled. "The court intended to test you. To break you." Elara met his gaze. "And yet I remain." He studied her. The way she carried herself. The way her eyes burned with quiet fire. The way her kindness extended even to those who could never repay her. He had expected desperation. Weakness. Fear. He had found none. And for the first time in centuries, Kael Draven felt unease. Because she did not need him. Because she might survive without him. And perhaps, most dangerously, because he might need her. He stepped closer but did not touch her. He lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "Tomorrow you may be asked to perform something you do not understand. Observe closely. The court watches for cracks in resolve." Elara tilted her head slightly. "Then they will be disappointed." Kael's crimson eyes flickered, an almost imperceptible emotion passing through them. Respect. And something more. Something dangerous. Something he had thought long dead. Curiosity. The test had begun. And already the human girl was changing the rules of the game. Night had fallen over Nightfall Citadel, and the corridors were alive with shadows that seemed almost sentient. Torches flickered along the ancient walls, their light revealing portraits of kings and queens long dead, and tapestries depicting wars that had scarred centuries. The air was thick with cold and expectation, for the court had decided the next stage of the test. Elara Vos stood in the library, a vast hall filled with towering shelves of ancient tomes, scrolls and arcane artifacts. She had been sent there under the pretense of preparing for her duties, but she already knew the library held secrets the court did not want her to discover. She traced her fingers along a dusty shelf, reading titles in languages she barely recognized. Something called to her, an instinct she could not explain, something deep and ancient, almost like a memory buried in her blood. Then she saw it, a small leather-bound journal hidden behind a false row of books. Its edges were worn, and the cover bore a crest she recognized, Nightfall Citadel's own insignia, but with a subtle mark of a previous queen, long erased from history. Curiosity overcame caution. She opened the journal. The pages were filled with strange symbols, alchemical notes, and personal entries. One passage caught her eye. "The king fears mortality he cannot control. The blood of mortals may bind, yet the heart remains free only when choice is granted. Protect her at all cost, for she may hold the key to survival we dare not name." Elara froze. She understood, in some inexplicable way, the gravity of what she had found. A secret hidden for centuries, protected by silence, by fear, and by those who thought mortals weak. At that moment, a cold voice echoed behind her. "Curiosity can be dangerous," said a noble woman, her tone sharp and icy. It was Lysandra, a vampire of considerable influence, known for cruelty disguised as etiquette. Elara turned, keeping her expression neutral. Danger is inevitable, she said softly. I prefer to be aware of it. Lysandra's eyes narrowed. You are mortal. You think yourself clever. I think myself alive, Elara replied. Lysandra smirked, revealing a hint of fangs. We shall see how alive you remain when the court tests you tonight. Before Elara could respond, a group of nobles emerged from the shadows, closing off the exits. Whispers filled the library, a low, mocking hum designed to intimidate. You will fail, one sneered. Humans cannot endure this place. They break under scrutiny. You will break and the king will watch, powerless to intervene. Elara's pulse remained steady. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed the journal and tucked it carefully into her satchel. She might be a human, but she had survived worse than sneers and whispers. And she had something no noble could predict: resourcefulness. The nobles circled her like predators, their expressions cruel, their power absolute. But then something unexpected happened. One of the youngest pages, barely more than a child, stumbled and fell between her and the advancing nobles. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. Instinctively, Elara stepped forward, placing herself between him and the court. Step back, she said firmly. The nobles laughed at first. A mortal trying to command vampires? But Kael Draven had been observing silently from a balcony, and he did not move. Elara held her ground. The boy recovered slightly and his trembling lessened. Thank you, he whispered. This small act of courage, repeated countless times in minor ways throughout the day, had begun to shift something even the ancient court could not ignore: the undeniable presence of moral strength. Kael descended from the balcony, silent as a shadow, his crimson eyes fixed on Elara. He did not speak. He did not need to. Every movement, every measured breath, every calm step she had taken told him she was more than a human girl. She was something the court had never accounted for: resilient, compassionate, and quietly fearless. He stepped beside her, and without a word Lysandra and the other nobles faltered. There was authority in his silence, power in his mere presence, and protection that was unmistakable. Elara glanced at him briefly, a flicker of acknowledgement in her dark eyes. She did not expect him to save her. She did not want to rely on him. But the knowledge that he could intervene, and had chosen not to yet, was a subtle comfort. The night grew deeper and the test became more subtle. She was asked riddles in ancient languages, faced challenges that required both knowledge and intuition, and walked corridors where traps had been laid for centuries. At every turn she remained composed. She did not boast. She did not panic. She simply observed, learned, and adapted. By the time dawn approached, whispers in the citadel had shifted. Where there had been derision, there was now begrudging respect. Where there had been mockery, there was caution. The human girl who was supposed to falter had survived, and in doing so she had begun to change the way the court measured power. Kael watched her one last time before retreating to his private chambers. She did not notice him, and that was exactly as he wanted. He realized something dangerous. He was no longer indifferent. The thought was foreign, unwelcome, yet undeniable. Elara sat by her window in the east tower, watching the first light of dawn creep across the snow. She touched the journal tucked in her satchel, feeling the weight of secrets that might save, or destroy, the court. For the first time she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. Not because she had survived, but because she had made a choice. And that choice had power. Power that even the Vampire King could not ignore. The citadel was quiet in the early hours, but silence in Nightfall Citadel was never simple. Every shadow could hold eyes, every corridor could hide whispers. Elara Voss moved deliberately through the stone halls, her satchel tucked tightly against her side, her mind focused on the journal she had discovered. Its contents were more than historical. They were a map, a guide, and perhaps even a key to survival in a court that had tried to crush her spirit. But today would be different. Today the court's subtle cruelty escalated into a test she could not anticipate. In the grand hall, Lysandra and a group of senior vampires awaited her. Their expressions were carefully controlled, their eyes sharp and predatory. Kael Draven watched from a distance, silent as always, yet his crimson eyes followed her movements like a shadow tethered to hers. You have survived the minor trials, Lysandra said, her voice sharp, almost a blade. But knowledge alone does not define power. Let us see if you can withstand what is beyond mortal comprehension. Before Elara could respond, the floor beneath her shifted, revealing a hidden chamber. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, ancient runes glowing faintly in a language she did not consciously know. And in that moment, something stirred within her. A warmth, a hum, a presence of energy she could not explain. The court stepped back, some intrigued, others wary. They had set this test to reveal weakness. Instead, it awakened something within her. Elara's hands rose instinctively, tracing the glowing runes. A faint voice echoed in her mind, ancient and melodic, speaking words she had never consciously learned. The energy responded to her touch, swirling around her like mist, bending light, bending shadow. She realized with a mix of fear and awe that she could manipulate the runes, control them. Kael's eyes narrowed. The reaction was subtle, almost imperceptible, but to him it was seismic. A mortal, an ordinary human girl, was not supposed to command this power. It was forbidden. It was dangerous. And yet she did. Lysandra stepped forward, her lips curling into a smile. "Impressive," she said, though her tone betrayed unease. "But can you control it without destruction? Without endangering yourself or the court?" Elara's mind raced. She had no manual, no instruction, nothing but instinct and determination. She focused, drawing the energy into herself, letting it flow through her, not outward as a weapon but inward as understanding. Slowly the glow stabilized, the runes no longer erratic, no longer threatening. Kael's crimson gaze softened slightly, not in warmth but in fascination. He had never expected a mortal to do this, never in 1,000 lifetimes. And yet here she stood, unbroken, mastering forces centuries old. A silence fell over the hall, the court collectively holding its breath. Even Lysandra, poised to strike a subtle insult or humiliation, faltered. "Enough," Kael finally said, his voice low and deliberate, carrying authority that silenced the hall. "She has endured every test and she has learned without guidance. Leave her." The nobles exchanged glances, uneasy under his scrutiny. Slowly they withdrew, murmuring, leaving Elara standing in the center of the glowing runes, her heart racing but her posture steady. After the hall emptied, Kael approached. He did not speak immediately. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, assessing, measuring. "You are stronger than I anticipated," he said finally. "Not just in power but in mind and courage. You may not know the full extent of what you can do, but the court has already begun to fear it." Elara met his eyes, steady but cautious. "Fear is not my goal," she said softly. "I am here to survive. And to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Kael studied her, the faintest shift in his expression betraying something he had not allowed in centuries: admiration. Not for the power she held, but for the heart she carried. "Tomorrow your tests will continue," he said, turning slightly, a deliberate act that forced her to watch him leave. "But know this, you are no longer just a human girl in this court. You have changed the rules." Elara touched the journal in her satchel, feeling the weight of history, secrets, and newfound power. The realization hit her. The Citadel was no longer a place where she simply endured. It was a place where she could influence, protect, and perhaps even lead. That night, in her tower chamber, she could not sleep. The power within her pulsed faintly, reminding her of its presence, its potential. She wondered about Kael Draven, the vampire king who had watched silently, who had never truly intervened, yet whose attention now felt unavoidable. She realized with quiet clarity that this was no longer just survival. This was a game of influence, courage, and choices. And in that game, she was beginning to hold cards the court had never imagined a mortal could wield. Outside her window, the snow glistened faintly in the moonlight. Inside, the warmth of possibility and the thrill of awakening something ancient stirred in her chest. For the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself hope. Not for escape, not for mercy, but for recognition. And perhaps, in the quiet of the Citadel, a connection was forming between her and the king who had blocked her path, one that neither time nor power could easily sever. The morning air in Nightfall Citadel was sharp with frost, each gust of wind carrying whispers of fear and ambition. Elara Voss stood at her tower window, watching the snow-laden spires glint in the pale sunlight. Her thoughts were a tangle of calculations. The hidden power within her, the secrets of the Citadel, and the subtle, almost imperceptible watchfulness of Kael Draven. The council had convened in the Grand Hall. A sudden discovery in the outer towers, a breach in the Citadel's defenses, had thrown the court into chaos. Rumors spread of a shadow moving unseen through the corridors, stealing ancient relics and threatening to destabilize the delicate balance of power. Elara knew immediately that the journal she had found, and the power it hinted at, would be crucial. She approached Kael privately, catching him in a dim hallway. His crimson eyes, usually inscrutable, softened slightly as he met her gaze. "They're testing you again," he said quietly. "But this time it's not just a trial. Someone wants to undermine the citadel. Elara nodded. Then I must act. If I can use what I've learned, perhaps we can stop them before anyone else suffers. Kael studied her for a long moment. Be careful. The court has its rules and bending them is dangerous, even for me. I am beyond rules, she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. I answer to survival and justice. The shadow had struck at the eastern armory, leaving behind signs of a struggle. Elara and Kael descended into the lower corridors, moving silently among the echoes of centuries-old stone. As they approached the scene, she could sense the energy in the walls, subtle distortions that betrayed the thief's presence. Her fingers tingled, a quiet reminder of the ancient power awakening inside her. Kael glanced at her, acknowledging without words that she would take the lead. Together, they moved through the maze of corridors, Elara guiding them with intuition and Kael following silently, ready to intervene if danger escalated. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the shadows, a vampire courtier known for cunning and duplicity. Lysandra had orchestrated this intrusion, hoping to expose Elara as weak and unworthy. But Elara was no longer the trembling mortal the court had first mocked. With a calm that belied her racing heart, she touched the journal in her satchel, letting the power flow through her. Light bent around her hands, energy coiling like a living thing. The intruder froze, startled by the invisible force pressing upon him. Kael moved with supernatural speed, stepping beside her to intercept any further aggression. Together, their presence was a perfect harmony of mortal intuition and immortal strength. Step back, Elara commanded, her voice carrying authority she had never known she possessed. The courtier stumbled and, realizing he was outmatched, retreated into the shadows. Kael exhaled, the tension in his jaw easing slightly. You handled that well, he said almost reluctantly. Better than I expected. Elara glanced at him, noticing for the first time the faint admiration in his expression. I did not expect you to doubt me, she said softly. I do not doubt, he replied, his voice low, a trace of something unspoken lingering between them. I measure. And you surprise me. The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance. Elara continued to prove her resilience and intelligence, deciphering clues in the Citadel's hidden archives that revealed Lysandra's plot in full. The courtier was merely a pawn, manipulated to destabilize Kael's reign and force a binding of Elara against her will. That night, Kael appeared at her tower without announcement. The corridors were quiet, lit only by the pale glow of moonlight on stone. He did not speak immediately, merely standing by the arched window as Elara moved to greet him. You have done more than survive, he said finally. You have prevented a disaster that could have claimed lives, my sons included. Elara's breath caught. The acknowledgement struck a chord deeper than she expected. She had acted out of instinct, out of care for innocence, not to gain favor, and yet the recognition mattered. Kael stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his immortal presence. I should have seen your strength from the beginning, he admitted, his voice low, almost confessional. But I underestimated the heart of a human. Elara felt a flicker of warmth at his words, a dangerous, thrilling sensation she had not allowed herself to experience. You still watch but do not interfere, she said, her tone teasing, though her chest tightened. I am learning, he said quietly. About you, and perhaps about myself. Outside, the wind howled across the citadel, carrying snow and shadows alike. But inside, a quiet understanding had begun to form, a bond forged not through grand declarations, but through shared danger, respect, and the subtle, slow recognition of trust. For Elara, the revelation was clear. She was no longer merely surviving. She was influencing events, protecting the weak, and even capturing the attention of a king who had once seemed untouchable. And for Kael, it was the first time in centuries he had truly watched a mortal, not to dominate, not to claim, but to understand, to respect, and perhaps to feel something he had long believed impossible: connection. The citadel still held dangers and Lysandra's plots were far from over. But for the first time, Elara and Kael faced the future not as predator and prey, or king and subject, but as two souls navigating a treacherous world together. And in that quiet moment, beneath the shadows of Nightfall Citadel, a slow-burning bond was igniting. One built on courage, loyalty, and a subtle, undeniable attraction neither of them fully understood yet. Nightfall Citadel had never been quieter, or more treacherous. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly under the pale moonlight, shadows flickering like whispers of centuries past. Elara Voss moved with deliberate care, the journal in her satchel pressing lightly against her side. She had uncovered the final piece of the puzzle. Lysandra's ultimate plan to bind her against her will and manipulate Kael Draven's court. She knew the risk. The moment she stepped into the chamber where Lysandra waited, the air shifted, thick with tension. The court had gathered quietly, all eyes hidden behind the carved masks of tradition, waiting for the moment when mortal weakness would falter. Lysandra's lips curved into a sly smile. "You should have stayed in your tower, little human. The citadel is not made for you." Elara's gaze did not waver. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "but the citadel does not define me. And neither do you." Kael stepped silently beside her, a presence both commanding and protective. His crimson eyes glimmered in the torchlight, measuring, calculating, and, unmistakably, trusting her. "You've been warned," Lysandra hissed, gesturing toward the arcane circle etched into the floor. It glowed faintly, a trap designed to subdue and bind any intruder. "Step inside or face consequences you cannot imagine." Elara's fingers brushed the journal. The energy surged faintly, responding to her resolve. She took a single step forward, confident in her control, feeling the runes pulse in harmony with her heartbeat. The circle threatened to imprison her, but she did not falter. Instead, she used her newfound power, bending the arcane energy into a shield that deflected the binding intent. Kael's expression remained calm, though tension coiled around him like a living thing. "Careful," he murmured, almost more to himself than to her. The confrontation escalated quickly. Lysandra unleashed a wave of hidden power, striking at them both, but Elara anticipated it, directing the energy from the journal to absorb and redirect the assault. Sparks of blue and gold danced across the chamber, illuminating the ancient tapestries in chaotic splendor. Kael moved in tandem with her, his supernatural speed and strength a perfect complement to her mortal ingenuity and courage. Together they became a singular force, two very different beings united by trust, respect, and the understanding that survival meant collaboration, not dominance. Finally, Lysandra faltered. Her attack, fueled by centuries of ambition and arrogance, could not withstand the combined force of a human who had discovered her own power and a vampire king who had learned to respect that power. "You cannot defy me," Lysandra gasped, stumbling back as the runes encircled her, harmless yet binding her movement. Elara stepped closer, her voice calm, commanding, and resolute. "I do not defy you for glory or for power. I act for justice, for those who cannot defend themselves." Kael's hand brushed against hers, subtle, almost invisible, yet conveying unspoken words. Strength, protection, and a silent acknowledgement of everything they had shared. Lysandra's fall was inevitable. The court, which had watched silently, murmured in astonishment. A mortal had not only survived every test, but had also saved the king, protected the citadel, and outwitted centuries of courtly cunning. Instant karma, justice long delayed, now unfolded before their eyes. Kael turned to Elara, his expression unguarded for the first time in centuries. "You have proven more than your worth," he said, his voice low, carrying both relief and admiration. "You have shown courage, intelligence, and compassion, the qualities I thought long lost in mortals." Elara felt a warmth she had never known, a recognition not of her power alone but of her heart. "I survived," she said softly, "because I had to. But I also acted because I believe every life matters, mortal or immortal." The tension between them softened, a delicate thread of connection that neither centuries nor power could sever. Kael stepped closer, letting his presence speak the words his voice could not yet form. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the citadel seemed to fall away, leaving only them, two souls who had found understanding, trust, and perhaps even love in the unlikeliest of places. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the spires of Nightfall Citadel. Snow glistened faintly, a symbol of purity, renewal, and choice. Elara turned to Kael, her gaze steady. "I am free to leave," she said, referencing the ancient law that had governed their interaction from the beginning. Kael's crimson eyes softened, a rare vulnerability in a king who had commanded fear for centuries. "And yet you have chosen to stay," he observed. "Not by law, but by choice." Elara nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Because freedom is not the absence of danger. It is the ability to choose who stands beside you. And I choose to stand here, with you." For the first time, Kael allowed himself to smile, a slow, almost imperceptible curve of his lips that carried centuries of restraint, now giving way to hope. "Then stay," he said softly, the word carrying weight and power far beyond its simplicity. The citadel held its breath as two unlikely allies, mortal and immortal, stood side by side. Shadows and intrigue had been confronted, dangers averted and justice served. And amidst the frost and stone, a slow-burning love, born of respect, courage and shared trials began to flourish. In the world of vampires, humans and ancient secrets, Elara had found not just survival but agency, purpose and the choice to love, and be loved, in return. The dawn had arrived, but for Elara and Kael, it was not an end. It was a beginning.